Very good morning, students. So here today we are with one more topic related to the ecology, which is very important nowadays, and this is the biodiversity and its conservation. So before starting this particular topic, I think we should talk something about biodiversity. That what is actually the meaning of the biodiversity. So if we take the literal meaning, actually in our biosphere there is immense diversity or heterogeneity uh, which is existing at the species level, but we can have other, you can say, diverse conditions also, which can be like at the level of the macromolecules and even at the level of the biomes. That means that in our biosphere we can have diversity from the species level up to the level of the biomes. So as we know that biomes are very big areas of the earth, they are also diverse. They have their own plants, their own climate, their own temperatures, their own fauna. That means that biomes are also having different kind of forms of the plants and the animals. So this is called as biodiversity. Now biodiversity is the term which is like popularized by a person, which is Edward Wilson. Now Edward, it described the combined diversity of all the levels of biological organization. So the most important of them are, so if we go with the types of the diversity, so the very first, you can say, the type of the diversity will be, the first type will be, it is the genetic diversity. So a single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over the distributional range. Now the genetic variation shown by the medicinal plant, suppose you have Wolfia. So it is growing in different Himalayan ranges, and it might be in terms of the potency and the concentration of the active chemical that the plant produces. So India has more than 50,000 genetically different strains of rice only, and we can have like 1,000 types of mangoes in India. So that means that genetically all these diverse plants, they exist in the same area. So this is what we call as the genetic diversity. Now after this, we have the second type of the diversity as the species diversity. Now this diversity is at the species level. For example, the Western Ghats, they have a greater amphibian species than the Eastern Ghats, because the Western Ghats, they have an environment which will be very beneficial, or you can say very congenial for the amphibian species. So that's why we have more of the amphibian species towards the Western Ghats as compared to the Eastern Ghats. So this is the level of the biodiversity at the level of the species. Then we have the third type of the biodiversity, which is called as the ecological diversity. Now at the ecosystem level, if I talk about this particular level in India, for instance, with its deserts, the forests, uh, the mangroves or the coral reefs or the wetlands or the estuaries, uh, it has a greater ecosystem diversity than any country like Norway or any Scandinavian country. So that means that India has got huge types or variations in the areas or their plant populations or the vegetation, and this is called as what we call as the ecological biodiversity. So we have different types of ecosystems in a given area. So as per the ecological biodiversity is concerned, India is having a huge, you can say, diversity at ecological level. Now, how many species are there on the earth and how many are there in the India? This is a very important question as per the biodiversity and its conservation is concerned. Now, if I talk about the level of the country, suppose we talk about the India, here, according to the International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, what we call as IUCN, so 2004, the total number of the plants and the animal species described so far is slightly more than like 1.5 million in the case of like India. So what we have is no doubt it is a very clear idea that how many species are yet to be discovered and described. There is no uh, exact number of those species, but still, considering this particular fact, the large population or large proportion of the species is still waiting to be discovered in all the tropic areas of our country. Now, let us look at some interesting aspects about the Earth's biodiversity based upon the currently available species, or you can say the inventories of the species. So, more than 70% of all the species recorded are the animals. So, this is very important thing that more than 70% they are the animals. Now, the plants, which may include algae, fungi, bryophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms, they are comprising not more than the 22%. So they are below 22%. Now, after this, among the animals, if I take the 70% of the biodiversity of the animals, insects are the most species rich taxonomic group. Now, this is a very, very important aspect that more than out of these 70% animals, more than 75% they are the insects. So, this is a very important aspect to note that insects are comprising like near to 75% of all the animal diversity in India. Now, after this, uh, out of every 10 animals on this planet, 7 are insects. So that's why I'm saying that 75% is like insects out of all the animals. Again, if I take up the case of the vertebrates, now if I dig into the animals and I take vertebrates into account, then we have like the fishes as the most, you can say, abundant group. So 50% of the vertebrates they are comprised of the fishes. Then we can have, after fishes we can have like amphibians, we can have reptiles, we can have birds, we can have mammals. So all these are comprising like near to 25% or 20% in the biodiversity of the vertebrates. Now, if I talk about plants, now out of these plants, we can have like mosses, we can have ferns, we can have angiosperms, then we can have lichens, we can have algae, we can have fungi. So all these are comprising the biodiversity of the plants, which is a total of 22% of the whole biodiversity. Now, out of these plants of 22% biodiversity, the fungi, only fungi is comprising like near to 60% of the total biodiversity. And the next huge biodiversity group is the angiosperms. Now, angiosperms, they are again taking, you can say, the percentage near to 40%. So we can have like fungi at the level of the 50 and angiosperms at the level of 40%, and the rest of the groups, which include the mosses, the ferns, lichens, and algae, they are comprising the rest of the 10% of the plants. So this is a kind of biodiversity which is found among the plants and the animals in India level. Now, if I talk something about the invertebrates, this is again a very important group. So among the invertebrates, we can have like more of the insects. Insects are comprising like more than 75%, as we have already discussed. Then we can have mollusks to like 5%. Then we have the crustaceans again to like 4%. Then we have other invertebrate groups which can be like near to 15%. So this is the biodiversity of the invertebrates. Now students, comes a question that what is the importance of the species diversity? Now this is a very important aspect to undertake whenever we are going for the conservation of biodiversity. Now, does the number of the species in a community really matters to the functioning of the ecosystem? This is a very important question. Now, if you have an ecosystem, suppose you have a forest and you have minimal number of species, now can it grow at its actual pace? Will the forest be like, it will be sustainable or not? How many of animals can live in that particular forest if it is having minimal of species or minimal of plants? Now this is a very important question. This is a question for which the ecologists, they have not been able to give a definite answer. Anybody, nobody, I should say, has the answer to this particular question. Now for many decades, the ecologists, they believe that communities with more species generally tend to be more stable than those with the less species. So now, if you have, suppose you have two particular areas, one area is having like huge biodiversity range and one area is having a less biodiversity range, then the area of the left side will be more stable as compared to the right area. So that means if you have more of the species diversity, you will be more stable. That area is more stable. Now, a stable community should not show too much of variation in productivity from year to year. Now, this is again a very important thing. Now, we don't know that how these attributes are linked to the species richness in a community. So, we may not understand completely how the species richness contributes to the well-being of an ecosystem. We know enough to realize that rich biodiversity is not only essential for ecosystem health, but imperative for the very survival of the human race on this planet. Now, if you have more of the species, there will be more of the food chains, there will be more of the food webs, there will be more of the food preferences among the animals. So if you have more of these, there can be more of the stability on the planet. Now we have to talk something about the loss of biodiversity. Now why it is important? Now, loss is not only related to the species level, but if a particular species is on the extinction side in a particular area, then whole of the animals they will be affected. Now, if a particular species, suppose we have a particular area and it has got a particular species, suppose it is A. Now, this species at an endangered level, then what will happen that the animals that are taking up this particular species as a food, all these animals will be affected. Now, this particular species which is at the level of the extinction, this is a part of the food chain in different like aspects. It can be at level 2 in some food chains, it can be at the level 3 in different food chains if it is omnivorous in nature. If it is herbivore, it will be at the second level in the food chains. Now, what I mean to say is that if a particular species is lost from a particular area, it will affect all of the animals. So, if we have like more of the species in the particular area, we have a B, we have C, then we have D, and different species in the particular area, we are having a more stable ecosystem in that particular area. Now, if we are losing some of the species, suppose we are losing 3 of them, it will be like unstable condition for the area to survive. So this is called as a loss of biodiversity. If we have less of the species, we have less of the genetic diversity, we have less of the ecological diversity, it is the loss to the whole biodiversity of that area, and that leads to the concept which is called as the need for the conservation. So now we have to conserve the species diversity in this particular area to make it more stable for living of different animals. Okay, now we are talking about what can be the causes of the loss of biodiversity. Now this is again a very important thing to note. So if I take suppose the very first type or the first cause of the loss of biodiversity, I can say it as the habitat loss. Now, any animal which is living in a particular area has got its own habitat. So we have the concept of a habitat, we have a concept of microhabitat, and we have a concept of the ecological niche. Now, if I talk about the habitat level, what will happen that if this is a particular area in which an animal is living, so this is the habitat area of that animal where it can go, it is feeding, it is reproducing in this area, it is living in this particular area, it is going out in the morning, it is coming back in the evening to its home, and where it is actually living in this area is the microhabitat. Now, the small square at the corner is the microhabitat where he lives actually. Now, whole of the black component, the bigger rectangle, is the habitat. And what is the niche of this animal is that niche is in relation to the profession of the animal. So, if I talk about the niche, it is the profession. Profession is related to that what the animal is doing in this particular area. So, niche is like having different aspects as per the ecological you can say level is concerned. So it can be spatial niche, it can be the trophic niche, and it can be the hyper volume. So this is a different topic, but still I am talking about the habitat loss. So here we are cutting like lots of trees. If trees are cut, where the birds will live, where they will put their nest. So there are no habitats for the living of the animals. We have like cut huge numbers of jungles and the forests in our area. So there is no home which is like left for the animals to live in. So this is called as the habitat loss. So if you have a like you don't have this particular rectangle, so where the animal will live in this red area. So there is no habitat, there is no biodiversity. That means habitat loss is a great cause of the loss of the biodiversity. Now, second thing which is very important, it is the over exploitation. Now, over exploitation is always and always dependent on the humans and the nature of the humans for food and shelter. And the humans, they can do anything for money. So when the need turns to the greed, the humans may overexploit the natural resources, even the fauna or the plants, for like their own greeds. So that can also cause a loss to the like biodiversity. Next, the third point may be it is the alien species. Now there are many kind of alien species that are introduced deliberately or unintentionally for whatever purpose, but some of them turn invasive, and that causes decline or extinction of the indigenous species. So when more of the species from the outside they are coming into a particular area, what will happen that they will overgrow the indigenous species, and that will like cause the loss of the biodiversity. So this is called as the invasion of the alien species. Now, the fourth factor which I think that it is causing the loss of biodiversity, it is the co-extinctions. Now, what is co-extinction? Now, when a species become extinct, the plant and the animal species associated with it in an obligatory way also become extinct. So this is called as the co-extinction phenomenon. Now suppose we have a particular plant and we have a particular animal which is dependent upon that plant. So when this particular plant will be like extinct, what will happen that the animal that is dependent upon it, it will also become extinct. So the plant extinction will cause the extinction of the animal which is living over it. So this is called as the co-extinction. So when a host fish species become extinct, it's a unique parasites. They also meet the same fate. They are also extinct. So the co-extinction can be the cause of the loss in the biodiversity. So now we are to the conservation. Now, if these factors can cause a biodiversity loss, then we should conserve biodiversity. Now, the question arises that, like, why we should conserve the biodiversity? Now, there are many reasons. Some, like, obvious reasons, they can be like grouped into three categories, which are narrowly or broadly utilitarian and ethical. Now, why we should conserve the biodiversity? There can be some arguments for the conservation of the biodiversity. They can be like human derive countless direct economic benefits from the nature. Now we are taking cereals out of the environment, we are taking pulses, we are taking fruits, we are taking wood from the forests, we are taking fiber, the construction materials, tannins, lubricants, dyes, resins, perfumes. Now these all things, they are like derived from the forests, from the plants. Now if we don't have these plants, can we like take these things for our use? I think no. So this can be one of the factors as to why we should conserve the biodiversity. Now, one of the argument, it says that biodiversity plays a major role in like many ecosystem services that the nature provides. Now there can be some of the services which are very important, like Amazon forest. If I talk about Amazon, it is estimated to produce like 20% of the total oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere. Now, this is a huge amount of oxygen. Now, I'm just talking about only the Amazon. Now, the plants, they are helping us to produce more of the oxygen. They are helping in the pollination. We have different types of the insects which are helping in pollination, like bees. They can be birds, they can be bats, they can be like bumblebees. So all these, they accomplish pollination without the help of the natural you can say the resistances. So there is a one term which is called as the entomophily. So entomophily refers to the pollination with the help of the insects. Now, is it ethical to think that insects are not important for biodiversity? No. Insects, the biodiversity relation of the insects with the whole of the species biodiversity is very intense. If we don't have insects in the like a particular area, there will be very less of the pollination, there will be very less of the reproduction in the plants, there will be very less of the growth in the like vegetation in that particular area, there will be no variation, I should say. So uh, the insects, even the animals, they are very important for the plant biodiversity. So the ethical argument for conserving the biodiversity, it relates to what we owe to the millions of the plants, animals and microbe species with whom we share this planet, the whole of the earth. Now, if I talk some philosophically or spiritually, we need to realize that every species that has some value on the planet, even if it may not be the current or any economic value to us, but we have a moral duty to take care of all the present species on the earth. So this is our moral duty. So we have to conserve the biodiversity on the earth. So this is the answer, that why should we conserve the biodiversity. So now students, we are to how to conserve the biodiversity. So when we conserve and protect the whole ecosystem, its biodiversity at all levels is protected. Now this is again a very important line. So we save the entire forest, suppose, to save the tiger. So if we have to save the tiger, we have to save the forest. We have to save the environment. We have to save the habitat. We have to save the micro habitat of the tiger. We have to save all the things that the tiger will eat in that particular area. So when we are conserving a particular species, we have to look into the diversity of all the species which are related to that particular animal. So this is one of the aspects that should be taken into mind whenever the conservation of the biodiversity is like taken care into. Now this approach of the conservation is called as the in situ conservation. So this is a very important term. You should go for it. So this is called as in situ or on-site conservation. So where the animal is, conserve it on the site. So this is in situ conservation. So however, when there are situations where an animal or the plant is endangered or threatened, then it needs the urgent measures to save it. So we have to save it from the extinction. We have to take it out somewhere. So this is called as ex situ conservation. Now ex situ is also called as the off-site conservation, whereas the in situ conservation is called as the in or on-site conservation. So this is the difference between the two types of conservation. So if we are saving the tiger inside the forest in its natural habitat, then this is in situ conservation. And if we are taking the tiger out of that area into a particular zoo or park for saving it from extinction, it will be ex situ or off-site conservation mechanism. Now these two approaches can be taken for the conservation of the biodiversity as per the conservation of animals and the plants are concerned. So on the total of the earth, the historic convention on the biological diversity, which is called as the Earth Summit, it held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and it called upon all the nations to take appropriate measures for the conservation of biodiversity and sustainable utilization of its benefits. Now, in a follow up, the World Summit on Sustainable Development held in 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa, 190 countries they pledged their commitment to achieve the conservation by 2010 in 8 years. Now, a significant reduction in the current rate of biodiversity loss at global, regional, and local levels is attained now in 2020. So, in the coming years, like by 2025, we have a follow up lookup in conserving different species which are on the extinct range or which are endangered. So all the countries they should come together for the conservation of the biodiversity, and both the in situ or the on-site and ex situ or the off-site mechanism should be emphasized to conserve the biodiversity of the nation. So that was all about the biodiversity, its types, the causes of its loss, and why should we conserve it, and the causes of the conservation or the causes of the loss of the biodiversity, and what can be the conservation measures for the loss of biodiversity. Thank you very much.